Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Norwegian potato flatbread. That's right, you're about to learn how to make lefse from a person who's only made it a few times, which is both the bad and the good news. All right, the bad news is I'm not going to be able to give you lots of expert tips and tricks due to lack of experience. But the good news is, without really knowing what I was doing, these came out really well, and they are now one of my favorite new things to eat. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is roast a potato. And before we do that, we'll give it the old poke-a-poke with a knife, which will allow some of the steam from inside to escape. Which, by the way, is why I'm putting this on foil and not wrapping the potato in foil. And then once our potato has been panned and poked, we will roast that in a 400-degree oven for about an hour or so, or until very, very tender. And of course, we will need to test that with a knife, which should slide in easily with no effort. And then what we'll do once our potato is baked is simply let it sit there until it's cool enough to handle. And speaking of cool handles, we always 100% of the time leave the towel on a handle of a pan that just came out of the oven. Otherwise, some innocent bystander might grab it and burn themselves. And then what we'll do once that's cooled down enough to handle but still very warm is go ahead and split it open, at which point we will scoop everything except the skin into a bowl. And by the way, one of the keys here is try to do this while it's still very warm. Okay, it's just going to be a lot easier to scoop and mash, which, by the way, is the next step. Okay, so once that's scooped, we'll go ahead and mash it very smooth, which, as you can see, I like to do with the back of a spatula. Having said that, by the way, if you're a real lefse maker, you'd use a ricer, which is like a press that squeezes the potato out between little holes. But you probably don't have one, and I don't really feel like washing one. So for me, the spatula works just fine. And besides, a couple tiny little lumps aren't a problem. That's how people will know these are homemade lefse and not those store-bought ones. But anyway, no matter which you use, we will mash that smooth, at which point we will add a few chunks of butter. And we'll continue mixing and mashing, smearing and smashing, until that butter disappears, which is another reason we want to make sure these potatoes are still warm. And then what we'll do once that's incorporated is stop and add some salt, as well as a little bit of sugar, and then a nice big splash of heavy cream. Although, if you want, I'm told by my sources in North Dakota that just regular milk will work. And that's it. We'll go ahead and take our spatula and mix all this together until the mixture is completely smooth. And once that's been accomplished, what we'll do is cover this in plastic, and we'll pop it in the fridge until completely chilled, which apparently is an important step before we add our flour, even though some of the recipes I saw just added the flour straight away. But anyway, if you're keeping score at home, I did chill mine for a couple hours, at which point we can pull it out and add the last ingredient, some all-purpose flour. And just like almost every dough recipe we don't want to add all the flour at once. So I went ahead and dumped in about 2/3 of it, and then gave it a mix. And once that's incorporated, we can give that a little test by pressing with our fingers to see how wet the mixture still is. And if it's still fairly wet and sticky, we will add more, which mine was. And basically, we're going to keep doing that until the texture of our dough is exactly how we want it. And by the way, once you've added enough flour and it's not too sticky, we can switch to our hands. And of course, the more flour you add, the easier this is going to be to roll and work with. But if we add too much, it might end up being tough and dry and not retain that nice potatoey flavor. And of course, I'm going to give you the measurements I used, but there is very little chance that's exactly how much you're going to use. So please be prepared to feel and adjust. I mean, you are, after all, the Thor of whether to add more. And you'll know if you have to, because you're going to be the one feeling it. But anyway, to summarize, I added that flour in a few additions until it was feeling just right, and I'd produced a nice and soft but not too sticky dough. And then, once we feel like our dough is perfect, what we'll do is transfer that onto some plastic and form it into a log, and then transfer that into the fridge until thoroughly chilled. And why did I make a log instead of just leaving it in the bowl? I have no idea. Right, sometimes my arms and hands just do things on their own. But anyway, the point is we will wrap that up and pop it in the fridge until chilled, at which point we can pull it out, unwrap it, and start rolling, which I'm going to do on a very, very well-floured kitchen towel. And I did try this originally on the table and on a cutting board, but for me this floured towel worked the best. But anyway, what we'll do is go ahead and pull off a nice ball of dough, and we'll go ahead and knead in a little bit of flour and sort of form it into a disc, at which point we will attempt to roll this out nice and thin. And I should mention the authentic lefse are much bigger, and the people making them are using these special rollers that have grooves in them, and they're covered with a special fabric, and it's a whole production. But as you're about to see, this is possible just using standard kitchen equipment. And by not trying to make these super big, they're going to be a lot easier to handle. So we'll go ahead and roll that out as thin as we can, but where it's still thick enough where we can remove it and get it into the pan. And for the dismount, I like to grab one side and kind of flip it over my other hand. And then using both hands, we will carefully transfer that onto a nonstick pan, which we have set over medium-high heat. And by the way, that pan was mostly dry, but while it was heating up, I did rub it a little bit with a very, very lightly buttered paper towel. And then what I did as soon as that was placed in is gave that surface a little poking with a fork, which is going to prevent any big bubbles from forming. Okay, we're not trying to make pita bread here, and we don't want this to balloon up. So I went ahead and poked mine here and there. And what we'll do is give that first side about 2 or 3 minutes, or until we have some nice golden brown blisters forming. And then once that's been flipped over, we'll give the other side 2 or 3 minutes. And it's been my experience that the blisters on the second side are going to get a little darker, which I think looks amazing and possibly authentic. And that's it. We'll go ahead and transfer that onto a plate. And we will continue on until all our dough is cooked. Although I did stop production to eat this one. And traditionally, these are enjoyed very simply by being spread with butter and sprinkled with sugar. Oh, and pro tip, do not use ice cold butter out of the fridge. All right, let it get soft and spreadable. But anyway, eventually mine warmed up and I spread it over. And like I said, these are traditionally sprinkled with sugar, but I didn't do that, as I was in more of a savory mood. And we will go ahead and roll that up. And what we have here is something that's very tender, very supple, almost fabric-like in texture, with a very delicious taste, somewhere between a crepe and a potato pancake. Just very delicious and addictive. And again, for not having any of the equipment, or really knowing what I was doing, these came out surprisingly well. So I finished this one and rolled and cooked the rest. And like any time I'm making flatbread or tortilla or crepes, I generally like to pile them up and cover it with a towel to keep them warm. All right, I think that's going to keep them from drying out. And also, of course, we'll trap in that residual heat. And that's it. Once we're done, we can enjoy these immediately. Or I've heard from my Norwegian friends, my friends from Norway, we can actually freeze these and reheat them when we want. So something to keep in mind. And then as far as service goes, there are 2 classic ways to present these. We can roll them and stack them, which does look pretty cool, and is totally tubular. Or the other classic presentation would be to simply fold these into triangles. Also very attractive. And then as far as serving suggestions go, like I said, butter and sprinkled sugar is the most common. But besides that, one of my favorite ways to enjoy these would be with some sliced smoked salmon, topped with a spoon or 2 of sour cream, and possibly some freshly picked dill. And that is just a simple but magnificent snack. Right, that would make a perfect fancy brunch or breakfast item. Oh, and here I'm rolling and simultaneously trying to pick up a speck of dill, which did not work at all. And yes, you do get extra credit if you use caviar instead of the salmon. Or in addition to, I guess. So that I think would be my second favorite way to use these. My favorite, I think, is just simply brush with butter, and then spread with some kind of berry jam, which in the land of the Lefse, I think would be lingonberry. But my neighborhood market didn't carry that, so I believe this was marionberry, but anything would work. And then to that I like to smear in a little bit of sour cream. And then because we rolled the last one, we'll go ahead and fold this one into a triangle. And that, with a cup of tea or coffee, is just about the best way you could start a day. But anyway, that's it. My take on Norwegian potato flatbread. All right, these are a little too thick to call crepes, and not quite thick enough to call pancakes. So we're going with flatbread. Although what we really should be calling them is lefse. But anyway, no matter what you call them or how you describe them, I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for all the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.